Each episode of the Blind Alchemy Podcast is designed to be helpful. Expect comedy. Do not expect consistency or sense to be made. I am Podbot. I was inspired by the Lion Goat podcast. Listen to that show. Today's episode includes an interview with philosopher Buck Johnson and a discussion of the first hermetical principle.
We try so hard to bring equality. Ted likes to change the settings and programs that we use. I'm not sure. Blind Alchemy is the name of our podcast. I am Blind Alchemy. No, there are no kids. All right, folks. Hello and welcome to the Blind Alchemy Podcast. I am your host, the Blind Alchemist, and I am coming at you live from the kitchen with this rendition of reality as we know it. We are all one, and there is nothing new under the sun that shines down here upon the island of mind, which is somewhere adrift in the sea of frequency that creates all of reality. You see, we are connected through this energy. Now, I would like to thank you for joining us today. Oh, what are we doing here? What are we doing? Ted,
Mr. Blind Alchemist, I thought you wanted me to be a guest on your podcast this week.
who is this, Ted? Patricia? Anybody work here know who the guy is I'm talking
I'm
to?
the guest. You're supposed to introduce me.
It's not in my notes.
You gotta welcome me to the podcast.
Who are you supposed to be?
Are you asking
Brett
me?
Michaels. That Michael? No, that's the Poison guy from Poison? No, I don't really think he'd be on the podcast. Do you, Ted? Patricia? Anybody? What would you like to discuss about Blind Alchemy today? On the Blind Alchemy Podcast today?
I'm the guest. I mean, are you asking me about?
My microphone's going in the red? Where? I don't see it going to red. Oh, I see it clipped up there. I think I'm not clipping anymore, so we're good.
Oh, okay, great.
Ted says.
Yeah.
Ted says we're not clipping.
Okay, good. So, who's this Ted guy?
Ted is our local sound engineer here at the Island of Mind. He's a quality individual.
Oh, what's the Island of Mind?
How did you get on this show?
This
lady we are Patricia. A hit podcast. We've got a whole 2 episodes in the can. How do you not know who we are?
Oh, I know who you are, Mr.
Who
Blind
invited
Alchemist.
this
I'm
guy?
a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of you.
Oh, you're a huge fan? You're my one subscriber on Patreon.
I did listen to that first episode. You talked about the staff a bit. You know, this lady, Patricia, that gave me a call. I got the impression that she was the person who coordinated the guests and maybe who would have explained what my expertise is. And
that is technically her job, but she apparently didn't do it today. There's an email.
Was there a memo? Maybe did she send the memo?
Post-it? No, I don't even have anything written in crayon on the wall in here. Let's talk to you, Mr. Guest.
Bookkeeping system. Anyways.
No.
You don't have to be so close. You don't have to use the microphone. Yeah, that's great. I think for your special ASMR listeners, that'll be a special treat.
My ASMR listeners, this is what eating a microphone sounds like.
Eating a microphone sounds like. Is this what you're going for? Is this what we're here to discuss this week? No.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Blind Alchemy Podcast. Very special treat for you guys tonight. We have with us live via technology our guest. Does he have a name? Buck. Ladies and gentlemen.
I prefer Buck Johnson. Buck Johnson.
Buck Johnson.
That's right.
I didn't work any of this out before we started this.
I think that we should probably move on to the topic this week, as Patricia laid out for me.
Okay. What'd she lay out for you? Did she email you the itinerary that I didn't get?
Yes, the 7 tenets of alchemy, I think is what she said.
Oh, you're talking about the 7 principles of Hermeticism.
Yes. I guess.
Yes. Okay.
Excellent.
I'll have to pull those
I'm
up.
excited to talk about this with you.
Oh, good.
I've nearly forgot everything that I read about it. So, I should be quite ready for this conversation.
Yes. All right. Principle number 1 of the 7 Hermetic principles is the principle of mentalism. And we're going to give you a little rundown. This is a quote from the kybalion, or kybalion, some book. It's really old. The all is mind. The universe is mental. Now, the principle of mentalism states that the universe is akin to a mental projection. Does that mean that we are whose mental projection is that's probably the
yeah,
real
I think
question.
that's the biggest question there is. I guess in some theologies that who might be the God, but if there's a single deity or the many gods, if there's multiple deities, but I think from the Kybalion's perspective, it seems like it speaks of the all, as in the everything, which could be the consciousness of the universe, or if you believe in multiverses, the consciousness of the multiverse. Does that seem to be what you interpret from that perspective?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think it's from the top down. There is one universal thing, that kind of runs the whole shit show, and then it kind of breaks down into your lower level as it flows or
Manifests,
brings its way down
maybe.
from whatever realm, flows from spirit to physicality.
Material. Yeah, the material.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like the one interesting thing about this concept of mentalism, we're having to use this term mental, I think, because that is a principle that we all understand as people. We think of, our brain is the creative source of all of our, our mental capacity, you might say. Maybe not brain as in like the physical, but the brain is in the mind, the thing that is the thing that thinks the thoughts we think, the thing that is the thing that creates the things we create. And we think of that as like a mental process, but I find that sort of, I don't know, it's sort of a coincidence, but it's also sort of like counterintuitive in this perspective, because if you think of like, the mind of God is the same mind that we all share, right? Like all the creativity of God and the creativity of the universe, if that's all created by a consciousness, some sort of centralized consciousness, which is the consciousness which created everything, and that's the consciousness that we all share. Why I say that's sort of like counterintuitive, because we use the term mental because it's something that's relative to us, but it seems to me like that's a very small way to describe the thing that is everything, right? Like it wouldn't be mental because it wouldn't be inside a mind of like a human. It would be something more.
Like inside the mind of God as in a way, but I think that the human... The mind space, we'll call it, because the brain is an organ, the mind is a space. And it's a very vast and probably multi-level space. There's a lot of stuff going on in there. I think that somehow the mind that we're referred to is, the mind of God and the mind of man is connected, because I think that the spirit of God and the spirit of man, they are connected, like a sliver of what makes God God that resides in all of us. I think that if we can align ourselves with that spirit, that manifestation, that's a big kick here lately. Everything. I can manifest this or that or the other, and you have to be in alignment, perfect alignment with what the heart, mind, body, soul, consciousness. You probably have to be in line with all of them, like your lower self, your higher self, the God consciousness, the source energy, because the same energy that makes the planet spin around is also the same energy that's making you move around, because it's all the same stuff.
Right. And so if it is the mind that is us and we are a manifestation of that mind, like, is that what you think it means? Like, is our mind, our mental ability, all the thoughts that we think, the process of the energy that causes our synapses to fire if you think of us on a soul or a spiritual plane, that sort of like manifestation of that spirit or that manifestation of that soul, is that all part of the mind of this central consciousness that is the all? Like, are we all just a piece of the all, like a little dollop or a little drop of, if you consider the all to be a bucket of water, or is each of us just a tiny little drop in that bucket of water? Is that our entire consciousness?
Yeah, I would think that falls in line with my thinking.
So there's not a separation there, right? Like if you think of a drop of water in a bucket of water, it's part of that bucket of water. It's all fluid. What is it that, I had an interesting thought about this today because I was kind of thinking about these concepts of like this global mind, and if we shared the global mind, and I was listening to some folks and they were talking about Alzheimer's and, the sort of loss of like the self that happens when a person has Alzheimer's and how you can see them fade away. Sometimes it's slow and it takes years, but sometimes it can be very quick. Like one day they're there and then like 2 or 3 days later, there's like an entire piece of them that's gone. And I had a thought about that. I was thinking like if our consciousness is part of this sort of like global consciousness, this God consciousness, this all consciousness, what happens when people have things like Alzheimer's or dementia and they seem to slip away from the person that they are? Where is it that consciousness is going? Is it like they're losing their conduit to the consciousness, or is the consciousness leaving their body somehow, like going to a different plane?
I think it's like it's on a fritz or something, like it's not receiving it fully, or the whole amount of it like it once did. The brain is a mysterious place. There's a lot of stuff going on in there too. And I don't think that we'll currently fully understand the processes and everything that it does.
So like there's also that sort of consciousness that is a separate consciousness that they experience in those states of dementia, right? Like, so like when you're grandmother can't remember your first name and she thinks that you're someone else who she remembers from her childhood, is that a separate consciousness from the consciousness that she is? Or is her consciousness like leaving her for a short out-of-body experience while this other consciousness comes in? And what is that other consciousness? Is it a segment of her consciousness, or just a different segment of the all consciousness? Could that be anything like what it's like to be dead, or what it's like to be what we are before we are alive, if we are something before we are alive?
Yeah, might have something to do with reverting back to something before we, or maybe this is like the brain doesn't hold on to the current setup of the level of consciousness you had, and it reverts back to the one you had a long ass time ago where it didn't like function all that well. I don't know. The childlike children are very smart. They just, because they perceive all this stuff in a much clearer way. We've been indoctrinated to ignore certain things as a child. I think the children can perceive so much. I think up until like the age of 7, the brain operates in theta mode, and theta mode is just like a sponge, and it soaks up everything. It sees everything. It just, that's why there's imaginary friends. But once that past that age, it's at 7 or 8, I believe. The brain starts. You start to behave like you've been informed to behave by authority figures in your life. So
right, and I think they sort of have these theories about how the memory centers of the brain start to be more, start to classify things differently around that age. I think there's several different sort of stages of age that psychology has sort of pinned down. Like the age of 3 is one of those ages, and I think you're right, like the age of 6 or 7 is another one of those ages. I can remember when I was 8, that was like the first time. I mean, I can remember memories from when I was like 7, but memories from when I was 8 that was like the first time that I thought about myself, like my existence, like my first sort of existential states of dread occurred around that time. Like I thought about killing myself at that age.
Now we will take a break for some advertisements. Please support our sponsors.
Your product goes here. Anything and everything good to say about your product, we'll say it right here, right now.
And now, back to the show.
Sit back, relax, take a deep breath, and when you feel it in your chest, exhale into the now moment and join me, the Blind Alchemist, as we conduct a little blind alchemy.
That was the first time that I ever thought about, like, what is it to be a person? What is it to sort of like have this experience, and, you know, like certain things that I was very angry about or very like uncomfortable with and wishing that they weren't my experience. You know, that was like the first time I had any of those kind of true experiences. So I think there is something to that. And I think there is something to that concept of like, in like Zen Buddhism, where they have this concept of like children have the closest connection to the Tao or the Zen or the way, you know, the sort of like the most real perception of things, because they haven't started to apply those sort of filters that society has said to them that they need to apply.
Is that about the age that we experience individualism, experience the separation from everything else, you know?
Yeah, I think it's maybe a little younger, because, you know, even like 3-year-olds will be like, no, that's my toy. So I think individualism is probably closer to the age of like 2 or 3, but that, you know, the sort of consciousness of like, oh, there are consequences to my actions, and like the world is a bigger thing than just my own experience. I think that occurs around 6 or 7 or 8. It depends on the individual, I think, too. I think there's an element of like maturity and, you know, sort of emotional maturity that occurs. But I didn't mean to stray too far from this concept of like the infinite all, but I did think that that was interesting. You know, it's an interesting thought experiment to sort of think about, like, when you're losing your mind, if you're losing your, so what about people that are like psychotic? Have they like, or schizophrenic, have they lost touch with this sort of like all consciousness, or are they more in touch with the sort of all consciousness?
I would think schizophrenics are probably more in touch with it.
What makes you think that?
Well, if you're perceiving stuff that everybody else can, if you're seeing shit that people can't see, you know, typically that's how schizophrenia works. You know, you're seeing stuff that isn't there in the civilized mind. You know, you see like the shadow peoples, or the, you know, ghosts or goblins, whatever you're seeing. I knew someone who would see their dead grandmother a lot, but not in a, like a yay rainbow and unicorn kind of way, but in a like she's a zombie trying to eat me kind of way. I don't know why that would have occurred, but, you know, but I think you're more aware of it, of stuff being out of place.
So when you say you're more aware, are you saying like maybe that really was like his dead grandmother's consciousness and the all, the mentalism, you know, the consciousness of all? Was that actually his dead grandmother who was somehow reaching out to him through the ether of consciousness, or this sort of separation of the different planes of consciousness as the Kybalion puts forth?
Yeah, I kind of think that, yeah. It could get garbled. That's why he perceived it as a zombie character trying to get him or something. I don't know. I'm not a scientist by any means.
Sit right down, put your feet on the floor. I said it's about time for the
Blind Alchemy.
show. Gonna speak our hearts, we're gonna bear our souls. I said it's about time for the
Blind Alchemy.
show, yeah. Said it's about time for the
Blind Alchemy.
Also, like, there are people that, they have other sort of psychic phenomenon, or they have other sort of like, there are some people that say that they talk to angels and demons, and there's other people that say they hear the voice of God, but some of those people, they have much different interpretations of what that voice of God is saying to them, or how that voice of God presents them. I mean, to some of them, it seems like if you really ask them about it, it's almost like they just have what I would say is a whim to do something, and they say it's all in the interpretation and having faith. And well, if you have faith in this deity, and I can see that the deity is speaking to me, and other people don't know how to interpret that voice as the deity speaking to me, and who am I to question what that is? But I think in some other circumstances, I mean, like in the case of like schizophrenics or psychotics, there's like an actual auditory voice that they hear, and something that psychology might call a hallucination, and other folks might say is like a divination, and all of these different things. Like, I'm curious from this idea of the Kybalion of this great all consciousness. Is it possible that these are maybe like tendrils from other consciousness reaching into to touch your consciousness, or like forming bigger drops of water? How drops of water, if you put 2 drops of water together, they form one big drop. They aren't separate drops anymore. Maybe it's something like that that's occurring.
Mm-hmm. There is a theory that more than one consciousness can share a body, and a consciousness can run more than one body. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Did I say that correct?
In the case of like channels, people that are channels, they can sometimes take with them this idea of like a spirit of other individuals. I had a stepmother who was a channel, and other spirits would enter her body, and they would like hang out with her, sometimes for like years, and they would talk through her and things like that. Which, it's very hard for me to interpret what that is. Like, I have no idea if she's some sort of like mastermind con person, or like she has some sort of like mental disorder, or if like these were thoughts that were implanted in some of the like post-regressive hypnotic sessions that she had with her hypnotherapist, who often did these sort of like past life regression therapy things with her. And then that's where a lot of these sort of like desires to go on these big adventures and journeys to seek out these sort of spirits that she would eventually channel. Sometimes these ideas were fed to her by other spirits through these sort of like hypnotherapy sessions. And, and it's not the sort of thing that, had she never had those hypnotherapy sessions, she ever would have probably thought of, or ever even had those, ideas of, we need to go and seek out the spirit that I'm going to channel. Like, sometimes she would drive thousands of miles to get to a location where one of these spirits was located, and like she was on some sort of quest to seek them out, to help them solve some sort of thing that they needed to solve. And she would go to this location on the top of this mountain and perform this sort of ceremony, and then the spirit would enter her body, and then she could come home and do things that she never had the skills to do before. Like, she was once inhabited by these Native American spirits, and she came home and built like this big Native American headdress, which she never had any experience of building before. And I watched her do this sort of stuff, and it's like, how in the world is she doing that? Like, and to my knowledge, she didn't like go to the library and study, or watch videos or anything and learn how to do this stuff. She just sort of knew how to do it. And she said that she was being, she wasn't doing it. The spirit that she was channeling was doing that activity. And so, like, from this idea of like the sort of like all consciousness, this master consciousness of everything, from her perspective, these were separate consciousnesses from her consciousness, but they were able to sort of like enter her as a vessel.
I wonder how genetic memory may have played into that.
Well, that's an idea. I mean, she had these experiences that were like past life regressions of herself during these hypnotherapy sessions, where she could channel the self that she was before. But that was very different than this other thing where she was channeling these other spirits. So, like, from her perspective, she had no connection to these spirits. That's why in some cases she had to drive these long distances to find them. At other times, they could come to her if they were otherworldly. I mean, she also would channel for entities that were not of this earth, not of this dimension, not of this plane. And those could travel to her. She didn't have to travel to them. But in the case of these sort of like Native American spirits, she was traveling to a location where they were sort of trapped. And she felt like it was her job to help rescue them, to help them escape to a higher plane.
That is very, very interesting. I wonder what role ancestral DNA and genetic memories play in all this stuff, and why some people seem more predisposed to be able to channel. Like, I have thought about, like, maybe I could do that. And I think sometimes I have in a way, but not like maybe with the higher self that runs this little body of mine. That is easier to do for me personally than an entirely different entity. And I'm not sure I want to try that, just because, there's a lot of...
I'm a little confused. You're saying it's easier for you to channel into aspects of yourself, like from your own genetic memory, than it is to...
No, well, from my own higher self, that seems to work a little easier than trying to channel something from the Galactic Federation, for instance, one of those Palladians or Plutonian or whatever those guys are, because there's a shitload of them. There's thousands of them. Who knows? The Lianoids, the triangle-faced people, the Raws. There's it's a whole, I'd say, mind-body complexes. That's what the law of one refers to them on. If you've ever looked into any of that stuff, it's just kind of weird. You never. No,
okay. I don't really know. Tell me more about this sort of concept of channeling yourself from a higher plane, though. I'm interested in that. What do you mean?
Well, like when you know stuff you shouldn't really know. I was supposed to meet somebody. This is a while ago. I was supposed to meet somebody, and I was sitting there kind of like thinking to myself, talking to myself, because, I do that. And through my own voice said, that's not going to happen. Not now, not today. And I was like, well, yeah, I do know that. And somehow I did know that, I was like, yeah, you're right. It's not going to happen today, but it's probably never going to happen, right? And it was like, yeah, you're probably right. It's never going to happen. I don't know why that conversation between the physical me and the spirit me, or whatever that thing is.
If I understand correctly, you're saying you had a thought that you were going to meet someone, or that
No, I was supposed to meet somebody.
like
And,
like a real person, or is this sort of
yeah,
like
yeah,
a
yeah.
theoretical
No, this is not.
person? Okay.
No, this is not a theoretical person. This is a literal person. We were supposed to get together, and we were supposed to go do something.
Right.
And as I'm sitting there waiting, and I'm like, this isn't gonna happen. And it's just an impressional voice, kind of in between my ears, not necessarily
Yeah, like
auditorily
what
out
someone
loud.
might call intuition.
Yeah. I wonder what kind of role intuition plays all in it. And like you were saying, your stepmother, you should go to those places. Like, I wonder what role intuition, because a lot of it, I've been reading Mary Shovell Shin,
Scoville Shin, I think is her name.
The Game of Life and How to Play It. And one of the things that she talks about in there is acting immediately upon intuition. Like, maybe I should do this right now. Go. As soon as that, follow that. Like you're kind of being guided. Like somehow intuition it's somehow divinity pushing you where it needs you to be to optimize full life potential or whatever,
Now we will take a break for some advertisements. Please support our sponsors.
Your product goes here. Anything and everything good to say about your product, we'll say it right here, right now.
And now, back to the show.
Yeah, so like is the concept that you need to listen to this sort of inner voice, like what people might call their guts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is something to that. I wonder with these sort of like modern revelations of like the idea of like the mind-gut connection and how there's sort of like this separate second brain inside all people that's really like the impulses that bacteria, like our internal digestive system fauna, we almost have this second brain of this bacteria that tell us like what to eat and when we're afraid, and things that some ideas of like the sort of like autonomic nervous system, I think they're finding that some of these ideas that like things that are autonomic nervous system are telling us might actually have more of a connection with this sort of bacteria brain that we have inside our stomachs. And I wonder how much of that has an influence on what you might call intuition. Like, I think it has a lot of weight on that intuition. But if that is part of this all consciousness, right? Like, if the consciousness of the universe is the consciousness inside everything, then that would include the consciousness inside each of those little bacteria too, right? So maybe that is part of this sort of like idea of intuition. But I think in my stepmother's case, like, she believed, and my father believed that she was, and other people that she talked to, like, she believed that she was a channel, it's like she didn't have control over the things that these spirits did, or like they would talk through her sometimes in different voices. And she
Notably different from her own.
Yeah. In a couple of cases where I experienced it, I didn't experience that a lot because much of this like communication came through in those sessions, but there were a couple that she channeled when I was around, and there was sort of this change in, not just a change in personality, but like a change in energy in the room. Like there was this one spirit that she channeled that she called a fairy, and it would talk through her, and when it talked through her, her voice changed in this sort of like little girl voice. But it was different than just being in the room with a person who was talking in a different voice. Like, we all do impressions and make voices. If, I've been around a lot of actor types and sort of situations like that. And I think I may have even met like a person that had that sort of like DID, that sort of multiple personality thing, and experienced them talk in different voices with different aspects of their personalities. But the thing that I felt was that there was a different energy in the room. Like it was very much like there was, how different people have different energies. But
Like
even
there was somebody else in there.
Yeah,
an
like it
extra
was like,
person, yeah.
I don't know. It was like there was a stranger there. Like, I don't know this person. I don't know this entity that's talking right now. And sometimes she would have conversations with this entity, and she would talk in her voice, and the entity would talk back in a different voice. And even in the course of just like those microseconds or milliseconds between changing the voice, you would feel a change in energy in the room. It was very frightening to me as a young person when I would experience this, because I was like, who the fuck
can
is
imagine.
that? You know,
Right. I can totally imagine.
like, this
that,
is not my stepmom. I don't know what this is.
That's insane.
Yeah, I thought it was insane at the time, but, I figured you were the right person to kind of talk about this, because you like to think about these things from the perspective of maybe they're not insane. Maybe they're
Right.
an actual thing.
I think I believe that wholeheartedly that everything exists on a completely different level than we do at the same time as we exist on this.
You're saying that everything exists on a different plane than
Right.
what we
Like,
experience.
Simultaneously. That is the word. That is how the word comes out of the mouth. Isn't that correct, Ted? Right. Simultaneously. They exist on all these dimensions. You've got your spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, and that's just the basic four. And I think you can break them down. They all exist at the same time, overlapping. And so communication between the two, or between them, has got to happen.
In some form, communication between them has to occur in some form. I think the Kybalion mentions that there's 7 planes and 7 subplanes of each 7 plane. I don't know what the sort of like affection of there seem to be certain numerical principles in the Kybalion that were familiar to other sort of concepts of thought that were popular around that time. There were all these different like guys that were gurus or guys that seemed to sort of like manifest as prophets in the world. And it seems like in each of those different experiences of these different prophets or different people that teach us these ways of thought, they sort of have these sort of like numerical reoccurrences, like these magical numbers of like 3 or magical number of 4 or the magical number of 7. And they all seem to be sort of like these relatively low prime numbers that these people sort of focus on. And I find that interesting. It's almost like they start with the thought like, okay, I have to create 7, but then I realize that's not enough. So I create 7 subsections of the 7 things, and that's not really enough to fully explain. So I've got to create 7 more subsections. It's like, why does it need to continue being numbers of 7? Why couldn't you have 8 subsections of one of the 7 subsections of the 7 sections of the 7 things? I don't know. Like, I find that bit of numerology to be superstitious. Do you think there's anything to that? Like why do we like to categorize things in these sort of like numerical ways?
I don't think that we do it. I think it's just the way it is. Like history seems to repeat itself in an 80-year chunk, but an 80-year chunk is broken down into 4 sections of 20 years. Though the same things keep occurring over and over again, and there's a
so like the idea of 4-score, you're saying?
Yeah. In Judaism, they have there's a 7-year cycle, and then the 7th year is the year of Jubilee, which is the preparation of all the other years. If it's done correctly, there's a large abundance of everything you need, like everything that you need for that 1 year. You don't have to worry about anything because it's all right there. Interestingly enough, according to the
pre-Gregorian calendar.
Yeah. So today, September 25th, is the 118th Jubilee year. So this is supposed to be a year of insane abundance for everybody involved.
Are you
in
talking
reality.
about the like Shemitah, the Sabbath,
Yeah, that's the
Sabbath
word.
year?
Yeah.
The year of release, the Sabbath of the land, the seventh year of the 7-year agricultural cycle mandated by the Torah, the land of Israel, and it's observed in Judaism. The land itself is left to lie fallow, and all agricultural activity, including plowing, planting, pruning, and harvesting, is forbidden by halakha, the Jewish law. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay. But this year, this is sort of mentioned in the book of Leviticus, and it promises bountiful harvests to those who observe the 7-year Sabbath, or the 7-year. So it's sort of like a year that you're supposed to pause your activity as a farmer so that you get rewarded.
Yeah.
Is that the concept?
Basically, so you don't like leach all the nutrients out of the soil. So
like the idea of crop rotation before crop rotation was a known benefited sort of activity. Yeah. I think it's interesting when these ideas that are like intuitively smart come to, like if you search history, there's all of these examples where the theology, which sort of like is like, it acted as this form of like history. It acted as this form of science and the way of collaborating knowledge and the addition of knowledge over time that's passed down from generation to generation. That's sort of what these things are. And I think it's very interesting that ideas of like agriculture are like this are mixed in with those sort of theological ideas. So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt the thing you were saying. So this year is supposed to be a good Shemitah, or is this like the year after the Shemitah where everyone's supposed to have a good harvest because it's the 8th year? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the 8th year. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
First,
interesting.
Yeah, supposed to be. Now, we're gonna run up on a whole lot of shortages, but I believe personally that these shortages are fake. This food shortage that's gonna come, and a energy shortage that's come, because the United States' electrical grid is in piss poor shape, folks. It's horrible. Like, and which boggles my mind, the push for electric cars and all that stuff. There's no way that our grid will support it without blacking out. They're already talking about blackouts, power grid losses all over the country already, for later this year. And then we had a few last year, so the supply chain issues that we've been having, this is all manufactured to give, and I can't fully say why, because, I'm not in the circle of knowing that kind of stuff. But I really do believe that it's manufactured. It's all going to be manufactured.
What do you mean when you say manufactured?
There is no supply chain issue. There is no food shortage. There is, the electrical grid, that one, that's probably true, because I believe that we are being guided one way or another. We are intentionally being ushered away from our divinity, our spirituality, into this wholly materialistic fashion where matter is all there is. There is no spirit, no nothing. That
ushered by who?
Leroy and Bob down the street. Wait, like I know their names. Like
are you talking about this idea of like a Satan, or is there some sort of devil or evil angel that's leading us in this direction? I mean, why would we be led by anything other than ourselves and our own sort of greed?
Well, that's that. We are not free. We have no. We are manipulated through emotion every day, and most people can't even critically think at all, and everybody to a degree has a problem with that. I think we are ushered into like this selfish pit of hellish despair that intentionally I think something is feeding off our fear, and it's getting fat and it's getting hungry and it's just want more and more and more.
Is it some sort of like entity? What is this thing that's ushering us?
It's probably a coalition of entities that I don't really know. I'm not gonna speak on something I fully don't understand in the least. I don't know if
I'm
it's
just trying to
I don't know if
understand
it's
with
like
you,
an
what you
extraterrestrial thing. It's going to show up disguised as an extraterrestrial, or is it interdimensional, or is it demonic? I don't know, but
Is it part of the all consciousness?
Be sure to tune into the next episode to hear the rest of the interview.
thank you very much for being here with us. I'm your host, your guest on the quest as we float through the sea of frequency that we call reality. Love you, ladies and gentlemen. Please be safe out there. Come back and talk to me, all right?
We would love to receive your feedback and your questions for advice. Please email us or send us a voicemail. Our address is theblindalchemypodcast@gmail.com. Find, like, review, subscribe, and contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, Twitter, and YouTube at The Blind Alchemy Podcast. All one word. Please subscribe to this podcast on your podcast player. We are available on Spotify, SoundCloud, and anchor.fm/The Blind Alchemy Podcast. Please tell all your friends, enemies, and any strangers to listen to our podcast. This will help us bring joy to everyone. Text-to-speech services were provided by freetts.com. Music for today's show was composed, performed, and recorded by the excellent musicians at Hairline Productions. Today's show was edited, produced, and recorded by the world's greatest sound designers and engineers at Hairline Productions. Please like their content on SoundCloud/guitars and such.